Ed Gein is one of the most disturbing killers in American history, not because of how many people he killed, but because of what police found inside of his farmhouse. Although he was only confirmed to have murdered 2 women, he spent years digging up corpses of women who looked like his mother, whom he was obsessed with, and bringing them home to turn their bodies into art pieces. When investigators entered his home, they found a nightmarish scene straight out of a horror movie. Bowls made from human skulls, chairs upholstered with skin, masks of faces peeled from corpses hung on the walls, a box filled with severed noses, and even lips nailed to a window shade pull cord. He had a belt made of nipples and made corsets and leggings out of human skin, all part of his plan to build a full woman suit so he could wear it and become his dead mother. Ed even admitted he tried to dig up his own mother's corpse, but gave up because she was too heavy. One of his 2 victims, Bernice Warden's body, was found hanging upside down in his shed, gutted like a deer, and police also discovered a human heart in a paper bag near the stove because he wanted to cook it later. Neighbors later reported seeing a strange female figure dancing in the moonlight on his property, most likely Gein wearing one of his skin suits outside. The horror was so extreme that multiple officers who investigated his farmhouse quit the force from trauma, and despite his house being a rotting, corpse-filled disaster, he kept his mother's bedroom pristine and untouched like a shrine. Perhaps the most chilling part of all was that the townspeople thought he was completely harmless. He babysat their kids and did chores while secretly wearing the dead in his spare time. Declared insane rather than executed, he lived quietly in a mental institution doing arts and crafts with paper instead of human body parts, until his death when people robbed his grave and stole his headstone as a trophy. Ed Gein's crimes were so grotesque and twisted that he became the direct inspiration for characters like Norman Bates, Leatherface, and Buffalo Bill, forever defining the skin-wearing, mother-obsessed killer in horror. Michael J. Fox was at the peak of his career when his life quietly turned into a tragedy. While filming Doc Hollywood at just 29 years old, he was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease, something doctors typically only see in elderly patients. He was so young that he thought the diagnosis had to be a mistake, but when specialists confirmed it, he went home, stared at the wall, and quickly fell into a deep depression, drinking heavily and hiding the truth from everyone for years, even his castmates. As the disease slowly destroyed his body, the world had no idea that while he was smiling and cracking jokes on the sitcom Spin City, his hand was shaking uncontrollably off camera. Directors had to constantly hide his symptoms by forcing him to sit during scenes or hold props with both hands. But Parkinson's didn't just steal his movement, it came with the threat of dementia, hallucination, and total loss of independence, a slow countdown he could do nothing to stop. Fox has since shattered bones from violent falls, undergone risky spinal surgery, and admitted that every day he wakes up with less control than the day before. The once energetic Back to the Future star has spent over 30 years watching himself fade in slow motion, and he said the moment he was diagnosed, "I felt my future get sucked out of the room." But instead of giving up, Michael turned his pain into purpose, founding the Michael J. Fox Foundation, which has now raised over $2 billion for Parkinson's research, making it the largest nonprofit funder of the disease in history by far. Despite losing control of his body, Fox might be the reason millions of others one day get theirs back. In February of 2000, Australian slaughterhouse worker Katherine Knight murdered her partner John Price in their home in Aberdeen, New South Wales. After an argument, she waited for him to fall asleep and stabbed him 37 times as he tried to escape, with blood evidence showing he made it to the front door before collapsing. Once he was dead, Knight used her butchering skills to skin his body in one piece and hung the skin on a meat hook in the living room. She then decapitated him and placed his head in a pot of boiling water, along with pieces of flesh to make a stew. She also cooked parts of his glutes in the oven and arranged 2 dinner plates with meat, vegetables, and gravy, each labeled with the names of Price's children, indicating she had intended to serve them their father. Police discovered the staged meal, the pot on the stove, and Price's skin hanging inside the house. Knight pled guilty to murder and in 2001 was sentenced to life in prison without parole, becoming the first woman in Australian history to receive that sentence. Melissa La Diabla Calderon became one of the most feared women in cartel history because her crimes went far beyond gunshots and executions. Working with the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, she targeted the most vulnerable, migrants, pregnant women, and the homeless, luring them with promises of safety or work before trapping them inside of makeshift clinics. Investigators say she performed crude C-sections to steal newborns for black market adoption, while the mothers were left to bleed out on the table. In other cases, victims were cut open and stripped of their organs, their bodies dumped or incinerated before corrupt medical contacts funneled their organs to wealthy buyers. Witnesses reported hearing screams through the walls at night, and bodies were found mutilated or missing several organs. Even hardened cartel enforcers were terrified of La Diabla, calling her the devil in human skin. When she was finally arrested, authorities believed dozens, maybe hundreds of her victims would never be found. This was the moment Diana Lovejoy collapsed in court after being found guilty of plotting to kill her ex-husband, Greg Mulvihill. Locked in a bitter custody battle over their young son, Lovejoy feared losing her boy and conspired with her firearms instructor Weldon McDavid Jr. to eliminate Mulvihill. In 2016, she lured her ex-husband to a remote dirt road where McDavid ambushed him with a rifle. Shot in the torso, Mulvihill survived by playing dead and calling 911. Investigators traced the attack back to Lovejoy and McDavid, and both were convicted. She received 26 years to life, while he was sentenced to 50 years. Doctors across the world have documented shocking cases of patients arriving in the ER with objects lodged deep inside their bodies. But one of the strangest in history involved a 5-pound dumbbell. The patient arrived in agonizing pain but refused to explain how it got there, forcing surgeons to perform a delicate operation to extract it. Britain's most prolific executioner, Albert Pierrepoint, spent 25 years hanging up to 600 criminals, but it was only his side hustle. By day, he ran a pub where locals drank with him, knowing full well he was also the hangman. In 1950, one of his own regulars, a man he nicknamed Tish, was convicted of murder and sentenced to death, and it was Pierrepoint himself who placed the noose around his neck and carried out the execution. Kyle Marissa Roth blew up on TikTok for fearlessly exposing celebrity scandals using follower-submitted blind items. Despite her bold personality online, she was quietly battling serious health issues behind the scenes, reportedly suffering from chronic pain and illness that she never fully shared with her audience. But instead of letting it break her, she used it as fuel. Roth said that seeing other chronically ill people push through their struggles inspired her to keep making content. However, in April of 2024, she was suddenly found dead at just 36 years old, leaving millions of followers stunned and searching for answers. Even stranger, just days before she died, Roth had posted videos saying she was going through something but would explain soon. Her cause of death still hasn't publicly been released, but her family has asked for privacy and insisted that she was deeply loved. The woman who spent her life revealing secrets left the world with one of her own, but fans remember her not just for the drama she uncovered, but also for her humor, bravery, and the way she made people feel seen and entertained during their darkest days. Here's a photo of a young American soldier who would become the face of one of the darkest scandals of the Iraq War. Sabrina Harmon was a 26-year-old U.S. Army reservist stationed at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq in 2003, where she became involved in a massive abuse scandal after photographs surfaced showing prisoners being humiliated, tortured, and posed like trophies. In the most infamous image, Harmon is seen smiling and giving a thumbs up while standing next to the dead body of an Iraqi detainee named Monadel al-Jamadi, who had died in agony during a CIA interrogation after being suspended from the ceiling by his wrists. Other photos of her showed naked prisoners stacked in pyramids, forced to simulate sex acts, threatened with dogs, and terrorized while hooded and restrained. Many of the prisoners photographed were never charged with any crime. Some were held solely because they were picked up during raids or turned in by rivals for bounties. Harmon later admitted she took dozens of photos and wrote home that the abuse was a joke and that watching prisoners suffer and die was, quote, pretty funny. She was convicted in 2005 of conspiracy, dereliction of duty, and maltreatment, and sentenced to 6 months in military prison, a dishonorable discharge, and loss of rank. The images shocked the world and became some of the most infamous symbols of U.S. war crimes in Iraq. The scourged back is an 1863 photograph of an escaped enslaved man named Peter, also known as Gordon, taken after he reached a Union Army camp during the American Civil War. The image shows his back covered in thick keloid scars caused by repeated brutal whippings while enslaved on a Louisiana plantation. The scars were the result of agonizing abuse severe enough to permanently disfigure his skin. When the photograph was published and widely circulated in northern newspapers, it provided undeniable visual proof of the physical cruelty of slavery and became one of the most powerful abolitionist images of the 19th century. Brazilian girl Helena Valera was kidnapped as a child in the 1930s by members of the Yanomami, an isolated indigenous group living deep in the Amazon rainforest. She spent more than 20 years living among them, where she endured repeated violence, forced marriages, sexual abuse, and the killing of her children during tribal conflicts. After escaping back to Western society in 1956, she struggled to reintegrate and was treated as an outsider, never fully belonging to either world. Haunted by trauma, yet emotionally tied to the only life she truly knew, Valero eventually chose to return to live with indigenous tribes in the Amazon, remaining there until her death in 2003, a rare and unsettling case of someone voluntarily returning to a society that once abducted them. They thought she was just a sweet, innocent grandma, but behind her front door was pure horror. In the 1980s, California woman Dorothea Puente used her Sacramento boarding house as a hunting ground for the vulnerable. She took in the elderly, the homeless, alcoholics, and people with mental illness, those with monthly government checks and no family to worry about them. Once they trusted her, she allegedly drugged them with heavy sedatives, suffocated them in their sleep, and buried them in her backyard like garbage. Tenants began mysteriously disappearing, but Puente kept cashing their social security payments and forging signatures as if they were still alive. Neighbors complained of a foul stench and constant digging in her yard, but police believed her every time she claimed the tenants had simply moved out. In 1988, police finally searched her property and dug up body after body, unearthing 7 decomposing corpses hidden in shallow graves. Even then, Puente was so calm and grandmotherly that officers let her step outside to get coffee, and she fled the state. After a nationwide manhunt, she was caught and eventually linked to at least 9 murders, though many believe the real number was far higher. Vern Troyer lived with a rare genetic condition called cartilage hair hypoplasia, which left him just 2 feet 8 inches tall and caused lifelong medical complications. Despite worldwide fame as Mini-Me, he struggled for years with severe depression and alcohol dependency, leading to repeated hospitalizations and psychiatric interventions. In April of 2018, Troyer was hospitalized following a serious health crisis related to alcohol and died shortly after at the age of 48. Authorities later confirmed his passing was intentional, highlighting the long-term toll of his mental health struggles behind the scenes of his public success. In 2022, a 19-year-old woman in Brazil gave birth to twins who were later confirmed by DNA testing to have different fathers. The rare biological phenomenon behind this is called heteropaternal superfecundation, which occurs when 2 eggs released during the same ovulation cycle are fertilized by sperm from different men within a short window of time. Although the twins develop together in the womb and are born at the same time, they're genetically half-siblings. Fewer than a few dozen confirmed cases have been documented worldwide, making it one of the rarest known anomalies in human reproduction. At just 8 years old, future UFC champion Ronda Rousey lived through a nightmare most fans never hear about. Her father, Ron Rousey, suffered a brutal sledding accident that shattered his back and left doctors warning him that he would slowly lose all mobility, develop a deadly blood disorder, and die in agonizing decline. Unable to face a future of paralysis and hopelessness, he made a devastating decision. Ronda has said the trauma never left her, and that her rage, toughness, and kill or be killed mentality in the cage were born from that loss. In 2014, a Ryanair flight issued 3 warnings telling passengers not to eat nuts because a 4-year-old girl on board had a life-threatening nut allergy. One passenger ignored them, opened a packet of nuts anyway, and the girl almost immediately went into anaphylactic shock. Her tongue swelled, she turned blue, and briefly lost consciousness as crew scrambled to inject adrenaline and prepare for an emergency landing, all because one idiotic passenger couldn't resist a snack. The girl barely survived, and the airline banned the selfish passenger for 2 years. 18-year-old Kylie Montero thought she was starting her future, newly graduated, 11 weeks pregnant, and dreaming of naming her baby girl Eleanor. But instead, she walked straight into a nightmare. Her boyfriend, 22-year-old Gregory Groom, had a violent history she tried to escape, even hiding in a domestic abuse shelter for 3 weeks. But like too many victims before her, she went back hoping he'd change. On August 6, 2025, during a late-night visit to his house, an argument turned terrifying when Gregory threw her to the ground, pulled her hair, and started strangling her. Knowing something was seriously wrong, she sent one last chilling text to her sister. "My phone is at 4%. If I die, it was Greg." Moments later, he reportedly stabbed her in the neck and chest, killing not just Kylie, but also the unborn child she was excited to raise. Instead of calling for help, he spent hours digging a grave in his own backyard, and around sunrise, he shoved her body into the shallow hole like trash. For 13 days, Kylie's family begged for answers while Gregory acted innocent, until police finally found her buried behind his house. He was arrested and has pleaded not guilty. In 1993, 16-year-old Marie Robard seemed like the perfect student, quiet, polite, straight A's, and deeply trusted by her single father, Stephen. They lived alone together, and friends said she appeared mature and responsible, even helping to care for him. But beneath the surface, Marie was quietly angry about one thing: a custody ruling that forced her to live with her dad instead of her mother. She grew more distant over time, secretly obsessing over how to change her situation. Then one night, her father suddenly collapsed in excruciating pain and died just hours later. Doctors believed it was a heart attack, and Marie played the role of a heartbroken daughter so well that nobody suspected a thing. Life moved on. Over a year passed before a friend came forward with a chilling confession. Marie had stolen barium acetate from her school's chemistry lab and mixed it into her dad's refried beans, calmly poisoning him just so she could live somewhere else. Investigators exhumed the body, confirmed the toxin, and charged her with murder. She was charged as an adult, convicted, and sentenced to 28 years in prison. But in a shocking twist, the honors student killer was paroled after just 7 years, walking free before she even turned 30. Morbid Facts, Part 770. This haunting photo shows an early radiation therapy session from the 1930s, when doctors used x-rays to burn away skin diseases or tumors with terrifyingly primitive equipment. The patient's head was clamped perfectly still so doctors could fire high-dose radiation at specific areas of the face. Because the dangers of radiation were barely understood, patients often suffered brutal side effects, severe burns, scarring, hair loss, blindness, and even cancer years later. In some cases, radiation was even used to treat acne or blemishes, causing far more damage than the condition itself. In May of 1973, a man walked into a bank in Ontario with a rifle and a bomb wired inside his own mouth. The device was connected to a dead man's switch, meaning if he released the pressure or was killed, it would immediately explode. He calmly took hostages and demanded money, claiming there was another larger bomb hidden inside the bank. When he tried to leave the building with a bag of cash, police snipers opened fire. The moment he was hit, the switch released, detonating the bomb in his mouth and blowing up his head and upper body in front of everyone. Investigators later found a second device inside the bank containing 200 sticks of dynamite that could have wiped out the entire building, but it was luckily defused. The man carried several fake IDs and was so badly mutilated that he's never been identified. Mary Kay Letourneau became one of the most notorious teachers in American history after authorities discovered she'd formed an illegal relationship with a 12-year-old student in her class, a crime that shocked the country and completely destroyed her family. She was arrested in 1997 and sent to prison, where she gave birth to his child while still serving time. When she got out on parole, a judge ordered her to stay away from the boy entirely, but she was caught violating that order and was sent back to prison to finish a full 7-year sentence, a move prosecutors said showed how disturbingly deep her attraction to him ran. When she was finally released, the story took an even darker turn. The former student, now an adult, chose to reunite with her, and the pair eventually married in 2005 despite their relationship beginning as a felony case, described by experts as a profound abuse of power. They stayed together for over a decade before finally separating, leaving behind one of the most unsettling and controversial teacher-student scandals in recorded history. Amu Haji, an Iranian hermit dubbed the dirtiest man in the world, avoided bathing for nearly 60 years because he believed cleanliness would make him sick. He lived this way into his 90s, smoking animal dung, eating roadkill, sleeping on the ground, and rarely interacting with others. Then in 2022, villagers finally convinced him to bathe for the first time in decades. Just a few weeks afterward, Haji fell severely ill and died at age 94. Matthew Day Merritt was born without legs and learned to walk on his hands from early childhood. As a young boy, his small size and unusual movements led filmmakers to place him inside the E.T. suit for the movie, where his hand walking gave the alien its unsettling, otherworldly motion. In October of 2018, 53-year-old Allison Gibson became trapped in her own bathtub after sitting down to bathe and realizing she could no longer reach the grab bar she would normally pull herself up with. Alone in her home, she remained stuck for 5 days, surviving without food by drinking water directly from the tap. As time passed, she weakened and struggled with exhaustion, alternating the water between hot and cold to stay conscious and hydrated. From October 15th to the 19th, no one noticed she was missing until a mail carrier saw her mail piling up and alerted neighbors. Police were called and she was finally rescued, having narrowly avoided death from dehydration, hypothermia, or exhaustion after nearly a week immobilized in her own bathtub. This footage shows former Nazi concentration camp guard Joseph Schutz covering his face as he arrived at a German courtroom in 2022. At 101 years old, Schutz became the oldest person ever tried and convicted for Holocaust-era crimes. Prosecutors argued that while serving as an SS guard at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp between 1942 and 1945, he knowingly assisted in the systematic murder of at least 3,500 prisoners. Schutz claimed he did absolutely nothing wrong and was not aware of the gruesome crimes being carried out at the camp. He was convicted as an accessory to murder and sentenced to 5 years in prison, though he remained free while appealing the verdict. Schutz died in April of 2023 before serving his sentence. Angie Barlow, a British woman with a severe fear of dentists, avoided professional dental care for roughly a decade by repeatedly supergluing loose or fallen teeth back into her mouth. Instead of fixing the underlying decay and gum disease, the glue trapped bacteria beneath the teeth and caused progressive infections. Over time, the damage became catastrophic, with dentists later finding that up to 90% of the bones supporting her upper teeth had been destroyed. By the time she finally sought treatment, 11 teeth had to be removed, much of her jawbone had deteriorated, and she required extensive reconstructive surgery and dental implants to restore basic oral function. Jeff Garcia, best known for being the voice of Sheen in Jimmy Neutron, died on December 10, 2025 at age 50 after a terrible chain of medical emergencies that began months earlier. He first suffered a brain aneurysm that caused him to collapse and hit his head, then later endured a stroke that left his health severely weakened. After a bout of pneumonia and repeated hospital visits for trouble breathing, Jeff's condition crashed when one of his lungs suddenly collapsed, forcing doctors to place him on life support. His family ultimately made the decision to pull the plug, ending a rapid decline that left fans stunned. That same day, veteran voice actor Jim Ward, who played Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome, and dozens of other roles, died at 66 after years of complications with advanced Alzheimer's disease. Ward had already retired from voice work several years earlier as the disease progressed, losing his ability to continue performing before eventually requiring long-term care. According to his wife, the disease steadily deteriorated his health until his death on December 11, 2025. Together, their deaths marked the losses of two of the most iconic voices of Nickelodeon cartoons. This was the moment a man attempted to rob a small loans office in Kazakhstan, smashing through thin laminated safety glass at the receptionist's window. He then quickly climbed inside, grabbed the female clerk, and threatened her with a knife to force her cooperation. He stole about $340 before fleeing, but police arrested him later that same day. Authorities confirmed he was eventually prosecuted and ultimately sentenced to 7 years in prison for the robbery, while the clerk managed to escape unharmed. This person looked over the balcony of their high-rise apartment building to realize they owned a cat, not a pussy. Here's a clip of a man trapped inside a grain silo with thousands of pounds of grain pressing in from every direction. What makes this situation so horrifying is that grain doesn't behave like a solid. Once it starts moving, it flows like liquid, pulling a person under like quicksand. Within seconds, someone can be buried up to their chest, and struggling only makes it worse. By this point, self-rescue is nearly impossible. The pressure restricts breathing, and panic speeds up suffocation. The only real chance of survival is to stop moving and hold a small pocket of air around your face, keeping your head above the grain until rescuers arrive. Accordingly, dozens of farmers die every year in this exact way due to grain entrapment. In 2008, 23-year-old New York teacher Hannah Upp suddenly disappeared during a morning run, prompting a massive search across Manhattan. She was found nearly 20 days later floating near the Hudson River, dehydrated, hypothermic, but miraculously still alive. Doctors later diagnosed her with dissociative fugue, a rare condition in which a person can mindlessly travel or wander with no awareness of their identity, the same condition Walter White claimed he had in Breaking Bad. 5 years later in Maryland, she went missing again. She was located 2 days later lying in a nearby creek, still wearing the same clothes she'd left home in and with no memory of how she got there. Her third disappearance happened in 2017 when she was living in the U.S. Virgin Islands. She reportedly prepared for work as usual before leaving home just as a hurricane was approaching. Her car was later located near a beach with her wallet, phone, and keys inside, but she was never found. Searches by air, land, and water turned up no additional clues, and since that day, Hannah Upp has never been seen again. Susan King spent 6.5 years in prison for a murder she couldn't possibly have committed. She had one leg, weighed under 100 pounds, and didn't even own a car. Yet police claimed she beat, shot, and dragged a man before tossing his body off a bridge 40 miles away. The lead detective built the entire case on lies, fake ballistics, drag marks that were actually water damage, and blood evidence that never matched the victim. And investigators later admitted they had doubts about her guilt before it even went to trial. But terrified of facing life in prison or the death penalty, Susan took a plea deal and went to prison for murdering a man she never even laid her hands on. Years later, a different man confessed in detail to the murder, even describing facts never released to the public, and even claimed the same detective threatened him to stay quiet. Only then was Susan exonerated, and the state eventually paid her $750,000. The detective who framed her never faced charges. He simply retired while under investigation for unrelated sexual misconduct. This was the moment when a DoorDash delivery driver was caught on camera spraying something into a family's Arby's order, seconds after dropping it off and taking a picture before casually walking away. Indiana man Mark Cardin said when his wife began eating, she immediately started choking, gasping, and vomiting, and her husband noticed a strange residue coating the inside of the bag. After reviewing the footage, he realized the driver had allegedly pepper sprayed the food on purpose for reasons no one can explain. The sheriff's office is now investigating, and the case could lead to a felony consumer product tampering charge, the kind filed when a regular delivery turns into a potentially life-threatening attack. A 10-pound mini dachshund named Valerie vanished during a camping trip on Kangaroo Island, then somehow survived 529 days alone in the Australian bush. Rescuers spent months trying to trap her, stunned that such a tiny house dog had endured snakes, heat, and feral predators long enough to actually gain weight. Some think she lived off roadkill, while others believe someone was feeding her, since no one can explain how she lasted nearly a year and a half in one of the harshest landscapes in the world. When she was finally caught using a trap baited with her favorite toys and her owner's clothes, vets found her fit and well, closing one of the most improbable pet survival stories ever documented. OF creator Bonnie Blue has been arrested in Bali after police raided a villa suspected of being used to film explicit content. 16 men were detained with her, but while most were released, Bonnie and 2 British men were held as officers seized phones and cameras based on a tip from inside the villa. She's now in immigration custody, questioned daily and without her passport, as officials prepare a court hearing and consider deportation in a long-term blacklist. Under Indonesia's morality laws, producing pornographic content can carry up to 15 years in prison. Mary Carol McDonnell, a 73-year-old former true crime TV producer, allegedly conned banks by posing as the heiress to an $80 million trust fund that never existed, securing nearly $30 million in fraudulent loans, including a $15 million payout she was never qualified to receive. But before the scheme unraveled, she completely disappeared, leaving behind a federal indictment, multiple aliases, and lenders scrambling to recover their losses. With possible ties to Los Angeles, Alabama, and Dubai, she was added to the FBI's Most Wanted list in 2025 as one of the country's most elusive white-collar fugitives. In 2022, Kazuki Takahashi, the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh!, drowned off the coast of Okinawa while trying to save a woman, her child, and a U.S. soldier who were trapped in a violent rip current. Witnesses watched him jump into 6-foot waves and swim toward the struggling swimmers as the water twisted into a whirlpool. The soldier ultimately pulled the victims to safety, but Takahashi was overtaken by the current and vanished beneath the surf. His body was found 2 days later, still in snorkeling gear, and investigators confirmed he died during the rescue attempt. Anthony Olson spent 9 years being poisoned by chemotherapy for a cancer he never had. In 2011, doctors told the 21-year-old he had a deadly blood disorder and wouldn't live to see the next year without aggressive treatment. When a follow-up biopsy came back completely normal, he was told to ignore it because it meant the chemo was working. For nearly a decade, he endured transfusions, crippling side effects, and the emotional fallout of believing he was dying, all while the original diagnosis was wrong. Later reviews showed Anthony never even had cancer at any point, meaning every drop of chemotherapy and emotional turmoil was unnecessary. By the time the mistake was uncovered, the treatment had already reshaped his entire life. Victoria Wright was born with cherubism, a rare genetic disorder that causes the bones in the lower face to grow erratically, giving her a swollen, distorted appearance that drew cruel comments from strangers her entire life. The condition can be extremely painful by tightening the jaw, straining the facial nerves, and making basic things like chewing or even speaking very difficult at times. As a child, she endured constant looks, bullying, and even adults snickering about her in public as if she wasn't standing right there. But instead of hiding, she turned her diagnosis into a mission, calling out the cruelty she faced after a BBC documentary sparked a wave of online abuse, and becoming a fierce advocate for people with facial differences. In 2015, Mary Cerruti vanished from her Houston bungalow without a trace. 2 years later, the new owners found her skeletal remains sealed inside a wall along with her glasses and shoes. Investigators believe she fell through the attic floor and became trapped, slowly dying alone in total darkness with no way of climbing out. But because she was one of the last homeowners refusing to sell as developers closed in around her, many people still suspect something darker. Her official cause of death remains undetermined. His head snapping back as he lost all control, tumbling through the air with no ability to deploy his parachute. Realizing what was happening, instructor Sheldon McFarland chased him down midair, fighting the wind and closing the distance with mere seconds to spare. McFarland eventually managed to grab Jones, stabilize his limp body, and pull his ripcord just in time, preventing a horrific fall that would have instantly been fatal. If you're a bad person who's afraid of heights, here's a sneak peek of what hell looks like. During a sudden storm at Six Flags Mexico in August of 2024, riders on the Skyscreamer swing ride found themselves trapped nearly 250 feet in the air as heavy rain and strong winds moved in. Instead of descending, the ride's automatic safety systems activated and locked the chairs in place, leaving passengers suspended high above the park with their legs dangling as powerful storms intensified around them. For roughly 10 minutes, riders were forced to remain exposed to the storm with no control over the situation, unsure of what would happen next or if the ride would be struck by lightning. Eventually, the ride was safely lowered once conditions stabilized and no physical injuries were reported. This was the moment Icelandic singer Björk crashed out at Bangkok Airport in 1996, lunging at reporter Julie Kaufman and knocking her to the ground, moments after the reporter simply greeted her with the words, "Welcome to Bangkok." What appeared to be an explosive reaction to a harmless greeting was later explained by Björk as a breaking point. She claimed Kaufman had stalked her and her 9-year-old son for days across multiple locations, ignoring requests to stop. Björk said the airport encounter triggered fear for her child's safety. Kaufman denied any stalking, no charges were filed, and the footage became one of the most infamous celebrity confrontations of the 90s. On April 16, 2014, the South Korean ferry Sewol capsized and sank off the coast of Jindo while carrying 476 people, most of them high school students on a field trip. An abrupt turn combined with overloaded cargo caused the ship to list and rapidly flood. Passengers were repeatedly told over the intercom to stay where they were. Instructions most of them followed as water quickly filled the decks. The captain and several crew members abandoned ship early, leaving hundreds trapped inside. The ferry sunk in roughly 2 hours, killing 304 people, the majority of them teenagers. The captain was convicted of gross negligence and murder by omission and sentenced to life in prison, while multiple crew members and shipping company officials received prison terms. In 2001, U.S. border agents at the Mexican border discovered 42-year-old Enrique Aguilar Canchola sitting inside a hollowed-out passenger seat that had been modified to look completely normal. He'd been sewn into the seat to sneak into the U.S. undetected, but agents noticed the seat looked unusually bulky and pulled the car aside. Canchola was immediately arrested along with the driver. In 1980, the FBI set up a fake company to expose corrupt politicians, and 25% of the congressmen who were offered bribes accepted them, leading to multiple convictions in one of the largest stings in U.S. history. In 2025, South Carolina teaching assistant Alexander Lewis was arrested after repeatedly spraying a powerful fart spray inside of West Florence High School, triggering nausea, headaches, and respiratory issues among students and staff. The odor contaminated parts of the building's ventilation system, forcing inspections and cleanup that totaled more than $55,000 in damage. Lewis was charged with disturbing schools and malicious injury to property, turning what he thought was a harmless prank into one of the most expensive school incidents of the year. In 1996, 31-year-old Canadian man Blair Adams suddenly became convinced someone was trying to kill him. He abruptly withdrew his life savings, emptied his safety deposit box of gold, cash, and jewelry, and made several frantic but failed attempts to leave the country. After being denied entry to the U.S., he inexplicably abandoned his construction job in Vancouver, flew to Washington, D.C., rented a car, and began driving aimlessly across multiple states. Witnesses described him as paranoid and agitated, constantly checking over his shoulder and telling strangers someone was after him. Days later, his naked body was found in a Knoxville, Tennessee parking lot, his clothes torn and scattered around him, along with $4,000 in cash, gold, and jewelry, none of it stolen. An autopsy revealed he had sustained many cuts and abrasions consistent with a struggle, and a violent blow had ruptured his stomach, causing sepsis and eventually death. Yet there was no weapon found, no DNA evidence pointing to a killer, and his car keys were found tossed under a nearby vehicle. Hotel staff recalled him pacing in the lobby the night before as if waiting for someone. Nearly 3 decades later, Blair Adams' death remains one of the most baffling unsolved cases in North America. On July 5, 2011, 37-year-old Kelly Thomas, a homeless man with schizophrenia, was beaten, pinned down, and repeatedly tased by Fullerton police during a violent encounter captured on audio and surveillance footage. Officers had responded to a call about someone allegedly breaking into cars, and when they found Thomas rummaging through trash near a bus depot, they claimed he became uncooperative during questioning, a claim later disputed by witnesses and contradicted by portions of the footage. As officers piled on top of him, Thomas screamed screamed for his father, begged them to stop, and cried out that he was being killed. Prosecutors later noted he said, "Dad, help me," 31 times, "Help me, God," 26 times, and "Okay" or "I'm sorry" over and over as he slipped into unconsciousness. He arrived at the hospital in a coma with severe head trauma, multiple broken bones in his face, irreversible brain swelling, and died 5 days later. 2 officers were charged, including one for second-degree murder, but both of them walked free after the case collapsed in court. In 1957, 2 young sisters in England, Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock, were killed instantly when a speeding car suddenly struck them during their walk to church. Their parents were shattered by the loss, but a year later they had twin daughters, Jillian and Jennifer, who as they grew began showing strange overlaps with the former girls' lives, recognizing toys they'd never seen, describing places they'd never visited, and developing an intense fear of cars. Jennifer was reportedly even born with birthmarks in the same locations as Jacqueline's. The memories eventually faded, but the Pollock twins became one of the most cited cases in discussions of childhood reincarnation, with some people believing it was true reincarnation, and others arguing it was grief, suggestion, or outright coincidence. A 6-year-old boy from Missouri was subjected to a staged kidnapping orchestrated by his own family to teach him a lesson about stranger danger. Police say an aunt's coworker lured him into a truck, told him he'd never see his mother again, and threatened to nail him to the wall of a shed. When he started sobbing, the man showed him a handgun and ordered him to stop crying. Investigators say he tied the boy's hands and feet, covered his face, and drove him around for hours while the child begged to go home. Once back at the house, relatives brought him into the basement and kept the act going, lecturing him about strangers while he was still terrified and restrained. Multiple adults were later charged after authorities said the ordeal caused genuine trauma, inflicted by the very people meant to protect him. In March of 2019, rising Liverpool indie duo Hers were in the middle of their first US tour when tragedy struck. After performing a packed show in Phoenix, 24-year-old Stephen Fitzpatrick and 25-year-old Alden Lauding began their overnight drive to California with their tour manager. Just before 1 a.m., their van was hit head-on by a pickup truck driving the wrong way on Interstate 10. The collision erupted into flames, killing all 4 men instantly. Investigators reported no signs of braking and found an open container in the wrong-way driver's wreckage, suggesting alcohol may have been involved. Just hours earlier, the band had posted that their US tour was going swimmingly and that they were almost home. Their debut album, Invitation to Hers, would become their final record. In 2012, a Pennsylvania tree worker named James Valentine was trimming branches high off the ground when his chainsaw suddenly kicked back. In an instant, the blade plunged deep into his neck and shoulder, stopping just millimeters short of severing vital arteries. Miraculously, the chain jammed before it could spin further, but the saw itself remained embedded in his flesh. First responders found him conscious with the chainsaw still lodged in place and carefully stabilized it as he was airlifted to a trauma center. After hours of delicate surgery, doctors successfully removed the saw and repaired the massive tissue damage. Against all odds, Valentine made a full recovery. When Disney casted Tim Allen as the Santa Claus in 1994, the studio quietly broke its own rule against hiring ex-convicts. Back in 1978, he was arrested at the airport while trying to smuggle more than a pound of cocaine and faced a possible life sentence before cutting a deal to inform on other dealers. He spent over 2 years in federal prison, getting out in 1981, then spent the next decade rebuilding his career until Home Improvement turned him into a star in 1991. So by the time Disney handed him the lead role in the Santa Claus, they were making one of the rarest casting exceptions in company history, turning a former federal prisoner into the face of Christmas. A recent medical case from Denmark describes a 39-year-old man who died within 26 hours after drinking water from a coconut that had been sitting unrefrigerated on a kitchen table for more than a month. When he punctured it with a straw, he noticed it tasted strange but kept drinking. Inside, the coconut had become contaminated with Aspergillus flavus, a fungus that produces aflatoxin, one of the most potent natural liver poisons known. Within hours, he developed abdominal pain, vomiting, and liver failure. And despite emergency treatment, he died the next day from drinking coconut water. Sports Broadcasting Hall of Famer Marv Albert, long known as the voice of basketball, was one of the most recognizable play-by-play commentators in NBA history. But in 1997, his career nearly collapsed after he was convicted of forcing a woman to perform oral sex on him. Evidence included bite marks matching his teeth and semen found at the scene. Another woman accused him of assault after arriving at his hotel room to find him wearing only silk panties and a garter belt. Albert pled guilty to assault and battery, was fired from NBC, and vanished from broadcasting only to return less than 2 years later. Despite it all, he went on to call games for decades, still celebrated as one of the sport's most iconic voices. In 2007, 19-year-old Michael John Anderson from Minnesota lured a woman to his home using a fake Craigslist ad for a babysitting job. When 24-year-old Katherine Olson arrived, he shot her in the back, dragged her bleeding body down a staircase, and stuffed her into the trunk of a car, which he later abandoned. When questioned, Anderson chillingly confessed that he killed her simply because he was bored and wanted to know what it felt like.